For many years now, I've been fascinated by people, and I love people, and so I've been studying character types and character. By the way, the talk for today is attraction, and it's probably going to be as much astrology as it is going to be philosophy. So anyway, I started studying psychological types. I studied the typologies of Freud and Jung and a lot of the other psychologists. And I've studied anthropological typologies, like endomorph, mesomorph, mectomorph. And I've studied astrological typologies. And even in the Rosicrucian literature, in things about the ductless glands, they have the endocrine types. I haven't yet gotten into the modern fad of studying blood types, but I'm just amazed at how many people use such different ways to get at consciousness. I believe that the types are true. I don't think we should get locked in types. And I think there are definitely extrovertive types and introvertive types, such that the extrovert believes that the good taste is in the apple pie, whereas the introvert thinks that the good taste is within. That if I don't have the good taste in me, there's not going to be any good taste. Anytime somebody is partisan or specialized like that, they only get part of the picture. The part of the picture that they get may be true, but it's not the whole truth. And therefore their share should be given to me. I should get the whole pie rather than the whole business, because I'm trying to be both introverted and extroverted. These same kinds of principles apply to mystery schools. That each of the mystery schools is for a different type of individual. Only with the mystery schools, the intent is to avoid being fixed on a specific type. And in the mystery schools, one always looks to the light. That one always must have the light before one can safely proceed in the mysteries. So it's sort of something like if you have a storage battery. A storage battery is something like a black box. If you take the storage battery and hook it up to a light bulb, the light bulb radiates out light, and if you put the light through a prism, the prism breaks up into a spectrum of basically 7 colors. The storage battery is like the Father. The power is invisible. It's always hidden within. No man has seen the Father. The light bulb is like the Christ attribute, where the power of the Father is seen as light. And the Holy Spirit is like the prism, where the light is broken into the 7 different rays. Each one of the rays represents a specific kind of individual. And each people belonging to each of the rays, through all of their many lives, are each attracted to a different mystery school when it becomes time to return to the one light. I'm not anywhere near sensitive enough to know anything about father stars and what school of initiation one should go through, but I am sensitive enough to know that the 4 Gospels have different feelings to them. Each one is for a different type of person. I was speaking to Daisy yesterday, and Daisy said that her favorite gospel is Luke's gospel, because she likes the feeling in it, and that's the gospel we're talking about today. When we spoke last Friday, we mentioned that Mark's gospel was a vocal gospel, because in that Christ does all of the very commanding things, and it refers to the words of life. In a similar way, Luke's gospel makes no bones about who it is for. It says that it is for witnesses, or for seers of the word. That is the literal words that are used in Luke's gospel. It refers to us who are eyewitnesses, or eyewitnesses of the word. Now that's a most unusual psychology, to be an eyewitness of a word. Not a printed word, but of the primordial word. Visual people believe that a picture is worth 1,000 words. Even though the picture is a two-dimensional representation of something that's three-dimensional, or in some cases multidimensional, for a visual person, a picture does something that words cannot do. If you think about it, our visual sense is very limited. We can't even see 180 degrees to either side, and we see much less vertically. So in terms of the entire reality around us, with the visual sense, we're seeing only a very, very small amount. People who are visually oriented accept the old statement that seeing is believing. Even though there are many, many optical illusions. And it takes a lot of training to be able to see correctly and to be able to interpret what you see. Even from the earliest infancy, a child is learning to interpret what it sees. You know, you've seen it when a child will see a light bulb that's laying in the crib, and it'll see a light bulb, and it'll try and reach that even though the light bulb is way across the room. So it takes a lot of interpretation to understand what we're seeing. Now, all of this is, when I state these kinds of things, I'm not trying to make an indictment or a criticism of visual people or of humanity in general for the way we look at the sense of vision, but I'm trying to get at some of the character of visual people and what it means to be visual, and why the sense is regarded why the sense of vision is regarded so highly. There's something about vision when you see something, and when you become familiar with it, or you accept it in your mind, you take that and you have the illusion that you know something. Now, in the physical body, we are very ignorant. If you look at a flower, it's a much different flower than if you smell it. If you smell a flower and don't see it, in each case, you're missing a lot of the reality of it. Or if you touch something, like these trees here that have the really little small waxy leaves, the ones that they sculpt into shapes, if you touch it, you get a different reality than if you look at it. Or if you hear the wind going through it, you hear a different side of reality. In the physical plane, even though we think we're seeing reality or that we're experiencing reality, what we are experiencing are just little windows onto reality. It's not like the totality that one can get when one has a spiritual seership, that you see everything from all angles at the same time, and you have the totality of it, you have the feel of it, you have the sound of it, you have it all at the same time. And the great problem that happens with the material world is things become set here, And in the material world, we take things for granted. And this puts us to sleep, and it puts us in a really great place of ignorance. Familiarity. When we're familiar with something, we stop our investigation right there. I'm teaching myself how to draw. I'm making feeble efforts at it. And I haven't gotten very far yet, but I've learned one thing. I've learned that observation or seeing is an ongoing process. Suppose you're walking down the street and a friend of yours comes from the other direction. And in the distance, you just see a form moving toward you. And suddenly, you recognize who it is. And almost instantly, at that moment, you turn off your seeing. You say, oh, I know who that is. And you don't continue to look. And because you don't continue to look, you don't continue to see what the person is. If you try to draw something, usually they teach you to draw something upside down first so that you don't recognize it. And then you have to draw what you see and not what your recognition has. So that you can't fake it when you draw. You can't fake reality. You have to see, and you have to continue to see. And anybody who can see and continue to see, anybody can draw. Anybody can make a faithful representation of what you see. You don't have to have any special artistic talent. It's available to anyone. It's been proven that they can take people who start drawing stick people, and by getting them to see and continue the observation process, they actually get so that they can draw remarkably clear pictures. So, if we want to utilize our senses, we're just taking the sense of vision, because this St. Luke's gospel is the visual gospel, or it claims to be anyway. We have to apply ourselves and continue to apply ourselves to see what is really there. And if you think about it, we've got to live anyway, right? And if we're living anyway, we might just as well take a look and see what's there. We're not going to live any longer or any shorter if we spend more time looking and seeing what is there. And we probably will. I actually believe you'd probably live longer, because what causes health or what causes longevity is being in tune with your environment. And if you're looking and seeing what's really there, you're in tune with it, and you know much more what reality is. The Rosicrucian philosophy tells us that our work is work and prayer, and this is pretty good work. Now, the beautiful thing about observation of any kind is that there aren't any special rules about it. You don't have to do it one way or another way. Reality is very democratic. You can look at it however you want. All right. All of these things are not to discourage people from visual description, but to encourage. Because there really is something to having a feeling of wholeness, of knowing what is there, whether you're getting it by seeing or whether you're getting it by hearing. If we take a walk in the forest, it's a very rewarding thing. We can just walk through the forest and see things and appreciate them, the beauty of them. But just imagine if you go walking through the forest with a painter, or with a botanist, or with a geologist. Each person sees something because of their trained observation that you and I don't see every day. Just imagine what it must be like to walk through a forest with an adept who has all of those abilities and can see all of those things. It must be really, really wonderful. So we have all that we need when we're born. All it takes is the effort and the application to be able to get at things. Now, if you've been listening very, very carefully, which most people don't, you'll probably have taken note that all along I have been using the word feeling when speaking of visual and pictorial types. There's a reason for this. Speaking astrologically, the moon is the planet that rules pictures and images and settings. The moon is also the planet of feeling and of moods and of emotional atmosphere. If you look at a painting or at an image, you get a feeling of it. You get a feeling of what a setting or a situation is like. Every painting has a mood about it. There is something about the visual sense that appeals to our emotional nature. There is an affinity between feelings and images. In fact, there are psychological tests. There's a Rorschach test, and there's the Minnesota multiphasic tests, where they show you pictures, where they show you abstract images, and from them, you're supposed to comment on what your feelings are. And what you state tells something about what is going on deep down inside of your soul. Pictures are very powerful motivators. About 30 years ago, I went to at the Chicago Institute of Art, I went to an exhibit of Rembrandt paintings. And there were hundreds, I think they ran many thousands of people through in one day's time. So you were shuffled through and you went through these walkways. And I came around the corner and there were people all around and it was, people talking. And I came around the corner and I stood in front of the painting of the death of Lucretia. And I was just at the right distance from it, and when I looked at it, I just burst into tears. There were people all around. I burst into tears, and I couldn't stop it. The feeling was so powerful that he had put into the painting that you were moved immediately by it. Now, Rembrandt was probably an initiate. Rembrandt hung around with Saint Germain. There is a quality about Rembrandt paintings that psychologists have found, and people who do dimensional studies, that if you get a certain distance from a Rembrandt painting, everything locks in and you can see right dimensionally into the painting and you get the whole setting of it. There are books called, I forget, The Other Dimension or something like, you probably read them, that tell you all about that. And Rembrandt has paintings of a night, just a side vision usually. There are two of them, and that night is modeled for by Lecomte de Saint Germain. And so that if you get some of the paintings by Rembrandt, you can see what the face of an adept looks like as painted by a master. It's really quite something to see. So, the sympathy that there is between pictures or images and our feelings should not surprise us as Rosicrucian students. In the Rosicrucian cosmoconception, we are taught that our desire bodies, which are our vehicles of feeling and emotion, were built in the moon period. You can even say that the desire body itself, in general, is ruled by the moon. because of its association with the moon period. In the same way that the vital body, which was developed in the sun period, is ruled by the sun, the desire body, which is ruled by the moon because it was developed in the moon period. So the desire body is our vehicle that relates us to the whole desire world. We have to have experienced a realm enough to have taken part of it and developed a microcosmic body in order for us to be able to fully relate to that realm. Our desire body is in a very young stage. It was only developed in the moon period, so it's in its second or plant-like stage. But nonetheless, we do have a lot of desire, emotion, passion, feeling, motivation. All of those are functions of the desire body. The world of desire is the world of color. In the desire world, when we feel something, we have an experience that is like the experience of color in this world. And the life of a painting is in the color. It isn't the shape, it's the colors that move us. Color is an experience that is completely visual. The mental experience is more like thinking. So, if we're seeking a soft heart, because remember, what we're trying to get at in all of these talks is a sane mind, a soft heart, and a sound body. All of last week we spoke mostly about developing a sound physical and a sound vital body. This week we're trying to develop a soft heart, and we're trying to do so by working through the finer feelings, the emotions, the things that appeal to our heart. And to do that, we're using the Gospel of Witnesses, St. Luke's Gospel, which, according to some traditions, rules or relates to the desire body. Now, the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception uses the word feeling in a most unusual way. Normally, when we hear the word feeling, it means a sensitivity to something. Or sometimes it means having an emotional responsiveness. If you look in the dictionary, that's what it says. An example is when we say, she has a feel for beauty. Or, he was feeling happy. In the first case, it's a sensitivity. In the second case, it is an expression of emotion. That's not quite exactly the way the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception speaks of feeling. The Rosicrucian Cosmoconception says that the realm of feeling is in the center of the desire world. And it says that feeling is polar, and that there are two different feelings, interest and indifference. Now, it's easy to see interest as something, as a kind of sensitivity, and it's easy to see interest as a kind of responsiveness. When somebody shows interest, you know that they're with you. But to see indifference as a feeling is a very difficult, a very hard thing. Now, you could see indifference as a lack or as an inability to be sensitive, but that's not the way the Rosicrucian Cosmoconception uses it. It says the desire world is a continuity. It's not filled with gaps, it's a continuity. And if feeling, though located primarily in the central region, works throughout the desire world, it is part of that continuity. It even goes so far as to say, I got a quote here. It's really this idea of indifference as a feeling is carried further when it says a thought being projected into, or a thought being projected against the desire body, quote, meeting the withering force of indifference. So it says indifference is something active. So it is part of it all. Now this is something extremely deep. It's so deep I can't begin to get into it. I'm not sure that I even know it all. I've thought about it for a long, long time, and I haven't gotten really very far. We'll talk a very little bit about it. This seems to imply that the desire body, from its inception as a tool of experience, so that we can experience reality, the Rosicrucian cosmoconception indicates that the desire body is born whole, just like a baby is born whole, and things are not added later. We may make improvements from within, just like from life to life we make improvements within our physical bodies. We add new organs, or in some cases entire systems, and we improve them and we generalize them, but bodies are born whole. Now, the desire body, unlike the physical body and the vital body, the desire body does not tire. The more you use the desire body, either in general or in specific desires, the stronger it gets. That is, the more you give yourself to any specific desire, the stronger that desire is going to become in yourself. And the more you give yourself to feeling or emotion, the stronger your desire body is going to get. So if we take that into account with the feeling of indifference, you know, there are some schools of spiritual endeavor that say kill out desire. And this means that you could, by practicing the feeling of indifference and generalizing it to everything and doing so more and more all the time, you could almost do that. You could become an almost totally indifferent person. That's probably not a very wise thing to do. The Rosicrucian philosophy is very wise in warning about that. In the first place, it's almost blasphemous. If God and the hierarchies have worked so long to give us the ability to feel something and to motivate us to do something, to desire to do something, it's almost blasphemous to say, no, that's not right. We don't want to do that. It sounds pretty dangerous to me. It's not, I think the divine intended us to be motivated. Otherwise, it wouldn't have given us the ability to do so. In a way, it would be almost cutting off our character at the thighs. We could be alive in the spirit and we could think, but then there would be nothing after that. We could never carry anything out to completion. We could never know whether ever anything we did was right. Some modern clairvoyants even say that when you see an enlightened person, it is literally that. If you see the desire body of an enlightened person, it's bright with light, desire light. And they claim that the correspondence between the light in the desire body and life is that when a person is so bright in their aura, they're interested in everything. Nothing. They're not indifferent to anything. They desire this and they desire that. They have interest. They care about things. They put themselves in everything. I don't know if those clairvoyants are right, but it certainly sounds true to me. Well, that's one of the ways I tell, being blind like most other people, that's one of the ways I tell whether a person is enlightened or not, is whether they have a good deal of interest in things in life. Interest lies, again, with the curious moon. And in Cancer, one becomes absorbed. Cancer is a sign of absorption. And when you're interested, you're absorbed in something. At the opposite end, you have Saturn. And Saturn is quite capable in Aquarius of cool indifference. Let me be indifferent to that. Or one form of Saturn 9, of the negative pole of Saturn in Capricorn, is ignorance. What I don't want to feel, I'll just ignore, and it isn't there. So, if we look at the mandala, or if we look at astrology, we get an idea of what interest and indifference are for. Like, for example, if Saturn rules the feeling of indifference, quite often in a horoscope, like in my case, Saturn is in the 7th house. And for the most part, marriage and partnership have been closed off for me. And so that is, I don't say I ignore it. I don't say I'm indifferent to it, but it closes off in the same way that indifference does. But because of that, there is more pressure to be applied in other things. So sometimes when we have a limitation to how much we can do, some things are ignored so that other things can be concentrated. So indifference then seems to have a value of specialization. Also, it rules timing. If something is held off for a while until you're ripe, then you can go ahead and feel it. And so probably one of the purposes for indifference is to defer things, and to defer things until the time is perfectly right, and then you can see what was there all along that you were indifferent to and know what it's all about. In any case, interest, when it is aroused either by thought or by intuition from within or by impressions from without, it wakens one of two forces, according to the Rosicrucian philosophy. The force of attraction or the force of repulsion. Now, sometimes if there are things that we can't always see right away in the visible world around us, sometimes it's helpful to use the astrological mandala. And this on the board is a very poorly drawn but complete astrological mandala. In the astrological mandala, the first sign is in the first house. That is, everything is lined up, and every planet is in its home position. The astrological mandala represents the horoscope of the universe, when everything is in its standard place. It's sort of like there are cosmic standards that are indicated by the whole makeup of the zodiac, of the houses, of the planets. Even the aspects are implicit in the astrological mandala. If we divide the astrological mandala in half such that the lower part is separated from the upper part, the lower part represents a personal sphere of activity. The personality itself is indicated by Aries in the first house. And the fourth house is when you're so subjective that you're in your own little world. The upper half is the more universal half. It relates to things out in the world. People who have most of their planets below the Earth in the lower half are people who are, their duties in life are to take care of their personal circumstances, and they work more on the microcosm. People who have things above the horizon are people who have more opportunities, and it is their purpose to do things out in the world, to be social, to be leaders in that sense. But let's look at it the other way. Let's divide it in half down the middle, so that we have the east half with Aries very deep in Aries in the first house, very deep in the eastern half, and in the western half we have Libra as deep as you can go in the western half. In a way, when we divide the astrological mandala between east and west, we have an abstract picture of the functionings of the desire world and of the desire body. I ought to have a translator, huh?
Why is the east in the left? Because the north is here and the south is there.
Yeah, the way astrology is always done, you have your head to the north, and you're looking down at the zodiac, and you're always facing south, and so this is always south. It's as if you drew a circle on the ground and then this is the north-south line. Okay. Yeah. All right. If, for example, somebody has the sun in the first house, the sun is self. And you'll find that if you look at horoscopes, the people who have the sun in the first house, they're self-made people. They're their own authorities. They don't need anybody else. Whereas if somebody has the sun in the seventh house, it's somebody that comes into their own being for the sake of others. That's a spouse-made person. That if you do things in that way. Now, throughout the astrological writings of Max Heindel, the one of the primary keywords for Aries is self-assertion. The Rosicrucian cosmoconception tells us that self-assertion is what is behind the astrological repulsion. We're talking about the desire world, and we're talking about attraction and repulsion. And so what Max Heindel says is the key word for Aries is self-assertion, and the cosmoconception tells us that self-assertion is repulsive. I think the way it goes, we have the experience of this. If a person is selfish, this is mine, like a dog barking or growling at its bowl, it repulses everyone else. On the other hand, Libra, or the seventh house, is one of the key words Venus rules. Venus is in its positive station in Libra or Libra. I don't know. We'll say it all the way. You say either, I say either. She and I were singing before. And dancing. She danced, yeah. But one of the key words for Venus, the ruler of Libra, is attraction. And that we see very clearly, the way it works in the desire world. This is other orientation. If you love other people and give yourself to other people, you have so many friends around you, you can't handle it almost. That is a very attractive thing when you give, especially when you give with love. I especially find Libra a very attractive sign. Now, what we're trying to do is we're trying to get to see how this works in the desire world. We want to get we want to understand why there is attraction and repulsion. So if we look at Aries on the astrological mandala and look at some of the other keywords, the sun is exalted in Aries. And one of the keywords for Aries is self-identification or identification. So we can say that one of the purposes, one of the positive purposes, this is Aries positive, one of the positive purposes for repulsion is identification. You push everything else out of the way so you can identify something. In fact, even in the wall chart, out at the desk for sale, there is an astrological wall chart. And one of the things that it says for Aries on there is self-identification. When we can identify ourselves with something or something with ourselves, then we can know it. We can have the direct experience of it. So, one of the purposes of repulsion is identification. Now, it is true that it is self-assertion that brings us into the lower desire world, and that by the fall drove us into this world much deeper, into this world of sin and separation. But when we're here, we can see a thing for itself. We can see it all by itself, and that is one of the purposes then of self-assertion, of repulsion, is to have that exclusive experience, even if it means being driven very far into the material world. If we take Mars and look at its negative pole, where it is carried to its furthest, where it's carried to extreme, one of the key words in Rosicrucian astrology is given by Max Heindel for Scorpio and the 8th house is repulsion. And clearly, the Scorpio is the sign of sin and sex and the sulfuric lucifers. It's very clear. Moreover, the negative pole of Scorpio is in the west. And that means it's in the other orientation. And that seems to indicate that repulsion is its most repugnant when it's forced on others. Where rather than just a statement of self, when you force it on others, it's really repugnant. So let's do the converse now and look at Venus. One of the key words of Venus or of Libra is union and marriage and other orientation. You might say that what is initiated by Libra is a statement, like Aries says, I am. I'm just as bold as can be. I am. Libra would say, I am because you are loved. It's like there is no knowing of self except through the loving of others. It is the otherness that counts with Libra. All right, let's see. I don't want to get too lost in my words here. So, it indicates that there is a union, that there is a marriage with things beyond ourselves. If we carry the analysis, did I trip? Oh no, I'm still right here. If we carry the analysis further, the Venus negative is in the eastern horizon, in the eastern half of it, in Taurus. And this indicates that if we personalize attraction, that personalized attraction then can become possessive. It can then become, this is mine. It then has a personal separativeness to it. In Taurus, people collect this and this and this and this, and they won't let it go for anything. So we have a little bit of the idea of how the forces of attraction and repulsion work in the desire world by looking at the astrological mandala. Now let's carry it a little further. Let's try to be positive because, there are really nice things about some Scorpio people. And there are some nice things about Taurus people. So we don't want to have them looking bad. Another key word for Scorpio is destruction. We all know that if we have hang-ups, if we're carrying all kinds of unredeemed material in our desire body, we have hang-ups. And we can't do things because all of our energy gets, people who are really hung up, highly neurotic, they become almost paralyzed. They can't do much with their life because everything they got tied up in complexes. Desire forms are like that. Desire forms have to be broken down. Therefore, this says that the self-assertion of Aries, when it is carried to its ultimate, it is the force that destroys or breaks down forms in the desire world, which if they aren't broken down, they just accumulate until we have a burden of sin on ourselves that is almost impossible to deal with. So there is a place for self-assertion and destruction. In fact, the zodiac even tells us, the astrological mandala even tells us how we do the breaking down. Scorpio is the sign of remorse. And the more we experience remorse, the more capable we are of breaking down the detritus that has accumulated in our of working with self-assertion drives us not only downward in the desire world, it drives us downward into the physical world, and it tends to drive the spinal fire downward. Whereas, it drives us down here into subjectivity. Whereas attraction lifts us. It lifts us into higher realms. It lifts us into the realms of art, altruism, and philanthropy, where we are motivated for others' sake. It also has the ability of purifying the spinal fire and raising it in our consciousness. So it raises us to a level of impersonality. And the effect of loving something and loving it for itself is what leads to the objectivity of the 10th house, whereas if we just try something in the self-assertive way, it leads us to a kind of subjectivity, and it draws us very deep down into the inner world, in the desire world. So, in terms of what we're trying to do in these talks, the purpose then of attraction, of giving ourselves to others, not only leads to an objectivity, but it refines us. It uplifts us. It uplifts the spinal fire, and it attracts us to others. It brings us to the place where we have a soft heart. All right. Getting back to the theme eventually. All right. The more we give ourselves to the attractive force, the more we do things for the sake of others, the more we get beyond ourselves. There are always psychological changes when we live a given way of life, and there are changes in our perception. The more we give ourselves to others, the more we see the bigger, wider world. And the more we live in that bigger, wider world, the more our self-importance diminishes. If it were all just Aries and that which leads into the subjective sphere, which is important, We have to respect ourselves. There has to always be a balance between the two hemispheres, but there is a feeling of personal importance. It begins with that whole sign of heroes. But the more we follow the path of attraction, the more we care about something bigger and beyond ourselves, and the smaller we feel in our self-importance. There is something that is totally necessary to experience spiritual things directly in the Spirit. And that is a quality that we cannot get by doing things for ourselves. That is the quality of humility. We cannot make ourselves humble. If we try to make ourselves humble, that is an act of pride in itself. But when we, like the Jupiterian signs are the signs that lead to humility, though they may not always be the most humble in themselves. But when you walk out and you see a starry night and how big it all is, you're not humbled by being humiliated. You're humbled by something great and awesome. When you look out on a starry night and you're just uplifted by the greatness of it all, you're humbled. And similarly, the height of humility comes with Pisces when you stand before the Spirit and you wonder how awesome the Spirit is in its manifestation. You can't help do anything but be humble. And you can't help to do anything but be obedient. Pisces is the sign of duty, where you do something for a greater duty rather than for yourself. So, if we're seeking a soft heart, as we are through the Gospel of Luke and through the Rosicrucian philosophy, the thing that being attracted to others to do things for their sake does for us, it has as its ultimate goal humility. Now, Luke's Gospel is just filled with humility. If you look at it, he's born in very humble circumstances in Luke's Gospel. He's born in a stable, and he has common shepherds that have probably smelled bad. He doesn't have kings coming to him. He has common shepherds. And so it is a gospel, that there's something about humility or living in those circumstances when you're open. If you want to close yourself to anything, all you have to do is become proud and self-important. And the more self-important you are, the more you think nothing else is worth paying attention to. But the more humble you become, the more the Spirit can flow through you. And it's like that old statement that if you let a stream run, it'll run itself clean. And developing a humility in caring about others is like that. The more of the spiritual flow that comes through us, the more it washes us clean, and we're clean all over. And Luke's Gospel is the gospel of cleanliness. So much so that a person is so clean they're almost like innocent, and they see angels. Luke's Gospel is the gospel of angels. You see them all over in there. Right from the Annunciation of Zacharias, and then the angels that attend the birth, that with the shepherds. So it's very much filled with angels. Now, at this point, you could say there is something like a contradiction when you say, well, Aquarius rules the ethers and the angels, or Virgo is pictured in the zodiac as an angel. But those are different systems of symbology. You can't take things from one system of symbology and mix it with another. I can't take what happens in my dreams and have them make sense in your dreams, because each of us has our own symbolism. The traditions of each of the Gospels being ruled or ruling one of the bodies, and the tradition of them ruling one of the fixed signs, they're centuries apart. Many centuries apart. They developed over hundreds of years. So what was intended by each of them is very, very different. But it is true that Matthew's gospel is strict, like Saturn and Aquarius and the physical body. And Mark is authoritative, like Sun and the vital body, with suggestions. And Luke does have the loving flavor. Oh, boy. The tradition of the four Gospelers being associated with the four fixed signs is exoteric. The tradition of the four Gospels being associated with the four bodies is esoteric, and those kinds of symbolisms don't make much, they don't fit well with each other. Besides, we're not trying to make a definitive symbolism. We're not even trying to prove the Rosicrucian philosophy. We're trying to get at reality. And we're using whatever is available to us because we realize that we're blind, and anything that helps us is great to that end. All right. We began by speaking about personalities, primarily feeling-oriented personalities. Our goal is a soft heart, and we have trodden down the path where we sense that feelingful people, pictorial people, are the people that are on their way to having a soft heart. Now, there's a great problem in this, because the medium that we are using to express the feelingful life that leads toward a soft heart, the medium we're using is verbal. And verbal things are very different, in some ways even contrary to visual things. Verbal personalities and pictorial personalities often have great difficulties communicating with each other. It's a very hard thing. It's even physiological, because pictures relate to the right hemisphere of the brain, words relate to the left hemisphere of the brain. There have been people where they have cut the corpus callosum, the connections between the two hemispheres, because they have a kind of epilepsy that can only be cured by that way. And so they have two separate brains. And they find if they have them looking at down a partition where one eye is looking at one thing and another eye is looking at the other thing, they'll ask them, what do you see with your right eye? And there'll be a fork down there. But the right eye is ruled by they'll say, what do you see with your left eye? Because the left eye is ruled by the right brain. They'll see the fork, but they'll say knife, because the verbal quality is ruled by the left hemisphere of the brain, which is looking through the right eye. And so when we're trying to talk about things of feeling and things about pictures, we're doing it the wrong way. We should have a slideshow, or we should have an art demonstration, or we should have a movie or something like that, instead of something as verbal as we are doing. The fluidic nature of emotions, which are a world of their own, you can't really easily pin them down with words. Our language isn't even suited to it. Even the Cosmoconception, as well written as Max Heindel wrote it, and Max Heindel was a very excellent writer, cannot do justice. St. Luke's Gospel is poetic. St. Luke's Gospel does have a lot of feeling to it. And it does distinguish those kinds of qualities that we're looking to. Not only does it give images, but, like even the parables, there are parables that are in Luke's Gospel that aren't in the other Gospels. And the added parables in Luke's Gospel have to do with kindness, with the attractive feelings that we're talking about. Probably the best example is the example of the Good Samaritan, which is found in Luke's gospel, but isn't in Matthew and Mark, and it's because those feelings that are supposed to be promoted by Luke's gospel could only be given that way. There are a lot of loving admonitions. We're told to be merciful, to give the treasure of the heart, to rejoice. And when he sends his disciples out, he says, go as lambs. We're supposed to be gentle, tender, loving people. It says, sell what you have and give. Even if you take the story of Legion, the man that has all of the demons in him, which is taken actually from the Eleusinian Mysteries, but we don't have time to go into that. But if you look at the story of Legion in Matthew and Mark's gospel, it's pretty harsh. But when he talks to the demons in Luke's gospel, he says, go in peace. It's a really sweet gospel, and that's what its intent is. The prime example, I think, is when he's talking about, the disciples say, there's another person that's healing, and he's healing in your name, and he's not part of our group. Jesus says, he that is not against us is with us. Now, he could have said it the other way around. He could have said, he who is not with us is against us. But that would be almost paranoid. That would be separative. That would be repulsive. The way it is chosen to be said is, he that is not against us is with us. It's inclusive. It's like love is. It brings everybody in. Even when Jesus rebukes the Pharisees, he does it in a much, much more gentle way in Luke's gospel than he does in the other two gospels. And this continues right until the crucifixion itself. The last words of Christ in Luke's gospel are, Father, forgive them, for they know not what they do. This is how the cleansing blood is accomplished, is by forgiveness. It is a matter of heart. He isn't concerned with his own agony. He isn't even concerned about his mission and whether he is fulfilling his mission as in consummatum est. What he is concerned about is, Father, forgive them. And that is the whole quality of Luke's gospel. And so if we want to gentilify ourselves, if we want to become kinder people, whether we're conservatives or not, if we want to be kinder people, Luke's gospel is a place that we can go to find those things. So we have looked in a skeletal way at the principle of attraction, the principle of love as it functions in the desire world. I hope you get this, because we only went a little way with the abstract image of the desire world on the astrological mandala. And if you sit down and do as Elmenbacher says, draw yourself the whole circle and sit down and work it out with a simple keyword book. I think they have one out here that's for sale for $1. And you just buy a simple keyword book and work on the principle. I think you'll find that you'll learn a lot more about how attraction and repulsion works, not only on the mandala, but then you can start seeing it in your life. And that's where it counts. And I once gave a talk called Christ in the Cowboy Movies, and the destructive quality where the desire forms are broken down. It's sort of like in the cowboy movies when the gang robs the bank and they head for the Badlands and the sheriff can't get a posse together and pretty soon they're killing each other off so that they each can have more. That's the way things work. It's a perfect statement. And so if we can see it in our lives, the way the principles of attraction and repulsion, the twin forces, working under the twin feelings of interest and indifference, it's very helpful. So, if we want to have a soft heart, we can work on it. We're about ready to say the Rosicrucian prayer, but before we do, let's take just a second or two and put ourselves in a feeling state. And let's try to say the Rosicrucian prayer with as much feeling and as much heart as we can put in it. O God, increase our love for Thee, so that we may serve Thee better from day to day. Let the words of our mouths and the meditation of our hearts be acceptable in Thy sight, O Lord, our strength and our Redeemer. We'll continue on with Luke tomorrow.
Thank you.
Thank you. It was a lot of fun.
That was attractive.
I hope so.
As you were speaking, I thought of Oscar Wilde's story, the story of Dorian Gray.
Oh, yes.
I thought that,